Hello everyone. This is video 1 of class 7 on chapter 8, which was planning and budgeting. As you may recall, we started presenting this material in our last class, and we ended actually on this slide. What we're going to do is do a real quick recap of up to this point, and then we'll continue on the rest of this, which is more now talking not about the budget itself, but the variance from the budget and how to interpret the results that you've gotten compare it to the budget year. So let's first start with a recap. Remember that in the planning process, it's very good to start with your value statement, your mission statement, and your vision statement, along with clearly expressing your goals and your objectives, which are how you're going to meet those goals. And it's good to do the very detailed one-year plan, and then always be doing strategic plan that usually rolls for 5 years out. And they become less and less detailed the further you go out. They're just estimates of what you think you're going to be doing. And by doing that, it makes you kind of think about what are some challenges or risks that are in the future. And change, as we all know, there's a lot of changes in healthcare. So when you're making a budget and you're allocating resources and committing to loans and people and employees and facilities, you want to have a pretty sure feeling that you're going to utilize those costs and those resources. When you get into the functional areas, by functional areas, we really mean in the operating budget itself, there's the marketing, operations, finance, admin, and HR, and all the facilities, and you can have subdivisions underneath that. You can look at the departments that distribute the services. It might be the OR department, the ER department, primary care, pediatrics, pharmacy, dental, the lab. You can have all those different departments. All of them need a budget that roll up into this one master budget. In the financial plan, you're very much concerned about the financial condition analysis, the capital budget, which, by the way, we'll be getting into in video 3 in this class. We'll be starting that. I should stop right here and just pause for a moment. In this class presentation, there's going to be 3 separate videos. This one finishing up the budget and planning with some variance analysis discussions. Second video is a video to help you do the problems in the textbook, which I walk through 3 problems that are very similar to the ones in the textbook to give you a really good foundation of how to answer those. And the third video will be starting on some capital budgeting, basic capital budgeting, and we'll be bringing that into the next class also. Okay, so excuse me for digressing there. Okay, we're just reviewing some of the some of the basic budget examples before we get into variances. And if you may remember, there are different types of budgets within the master budget to make up that. I'm calling it a master budget or the operational budget, but it'll also be called later on the static budget. And in that static budget, you have a statistics budget, a revenue budget, an expense budget, an operating budget, and then you should also come up with control procedures, a discussion about how you're going to make sure that the budget is adhered to. A statistics budget reviews or comes up with all your assumptions for the number of visits that you're going to do by area and sort of your standard costs of those visits. And that is usually based on history, or if you're going into a new product line or a new service, it's going to be on estimates. The revenue budget takes and projects your revenue by all the service lines. And it's the top section of your financial statements. Your expense budget obviously is all your expenses, and it could be inventory expense, um, but also it includes your fixed and your variable expenses. So you should be able to identify your costs both as fixed and variable, and also overhead, as we talked about with the overhead allocations. Major components of your expenses are your labor, your salaries, your wages, your fringe benefits. Can't forget overtime and training and education and all those cost classifications, expense classifications, including non-labor items like your facility. And you can't forget your depreciation and your lease expense and your supplies and administrative supplies and all those kinds of things, along with your administrative costs. There's different ways to start the budget. A lot of people use the conventional method, which is looking at prior budgets and prior actuals to come up with what their new expense, what the new budget's going to be, just based on some changes that they know of. If they know services are expanding, they'll do that. And that's very good if you've got a really steady state and you don't have a lot of cost overruns. Some people also do a zero-based budget where they kind of strip it all back down to nothing, don't use any of the assumptions from before, and rebuild it. And the reason they do that is because they don't like the results they were getting. And don't forget, a budget is not just a piece of thing, a bunch of numbers on a paper. It's a plan that you want to execute too. So zero-based budgets really do a good job on making, helping to enforce all the changes you want to make, because you're going to hold people accountable to those. And then another way to start the budget is to do it from a top down or bottom up. Top down is starting with your revenue numbers and all your costs and just going and it's almost assigning the cost to the departments and telling them that's where they have to live within and tell them to come up with what they think how much they're going to spend and where they're going to spend that amount in those departments. Bottom up is the exact opposite, where you go to them and you say, well, give me what you think your costs are going to be during the next year. Go ahead and add in anything that you'd like to, that you think you want to try to accomplish this year, and then we'll roll that up to the top. And usually what happens when you do the bottom up, if you aren't careful to give certain parameters, you end up with an awful lot of cost and not enough revenue. Then you've got to go back to the beginning and tell them they have to look at ways to cut some of those costs or cut out some of the programs. Okay, so now we can start with that's been sort of a real quick recap of what we talked about at the last class. What we're going to do now is do a simple start in with the slides, and we're going to be switching between Excel and the PowerPoint. So, I will be posting that Excel spreadsheet for you with these presentations so you can have as an example. So let's start with a simple operating budget. What my Excel spreadsheets do, they follow the exact numbers and operating budget that is in the book, so you can see it in Excel and see how it all kind of pulls together. And I've added a few other little things in, and then we can also see how all the variances are calculated. So they use Carroll Clinic, and this budget was created at the end of 2010. The budget is divided into 4 parts: volume assumptions, revenue assumptions, cost assumptions, and on the bottom a pro forma P&L statement. We're going to go through those sections, and then we're going to jump into the Excel sheet and kind of review it in Excel, and then we'll be staying in Excel for a while doing a lot of the variances. So this is on the volume assumptions. You'll notice that they have fee for service. They plan to have 36,000 visits, but they also have capitated lives, which means they have capitated contracts. And just for those of you that aren't familiar with this is the number of member months. Capitated is usually done by member months, because you can have someone, usually with insurances, they're in for the full month. It's hard to get out of an insurance plan to be halfway through a month. So what they do is they say, okay, everybody, how many people are going to be in the plan each month, and then they come up with those number of months. It's an easier way to allocate and actually pay. Insurances pay for member months, members per member month. In this case, they have 360,000. They have 30,000 capitated lives with 360,000 member months. You can see that's really just the 30,000 times 12 months, giving us the 360,000 months. And they're using a utilization per member month to calculate how many office visits there's going to be for those 30,000 capitated lives, giving us a total expected visits of 90,000, the fee for service plus the 54,000 of capitated. That's very important because that number of visits is what your physical structure and the number and what you have to have enough resources to allocate it to cover those kinds of visits. Enough providers, enough space, all along that line. Okay, now we'll continue on with the revenue assumptions. They're saying the fee for service is going to give them $25 per visit on average. Those are the 36,000 visits, $900,000 of fee for service revenue. Capitated lives, $3 per member per month times the number of lives months they had gives us a total of $1,080,000. Total revenue for fee for service and capitated lives is $1,980,000. Variable cost, labor, $1,200,000, and notice they have to have an estimate of the number of hours and the average labor rate. That comes from your statistical budget. Same with supplies, number of units they're going to use, because these are variable costs, and average cost per unit, giving us a total variable cost of $15. Then we've got some other costs. There's the overhead plant and equipment, which is a fixed cost, not a variable cost, at $500, giving us total expected cost of $1,850,000. And this is all their operating budget. So what they've put together on their pro forma. Now they have a pro forma P&L statement, which takes the revenue dollars plus the cost to come up with a projected profit. This is their static budget. What we're going to do now is jump to our Excel sheet, and here we go. This is that budget we just went through, and you can see the same visits, all the member months. This is our volume assumption, our revenue assumption, our cost assumption, and here's our pro forma P&L statement. $1,980,000 revenue. I put in a contribution margin in here, so if we ever wanted to do some graphing, we could. Fixed costs, our net results. Okay. Now we're going to move into what happens next. Obviously, you go through the year, you're monitoring your budget, you're making adjustments, but at the end of the year, you end up having your actual results. So what I've done is I've put in right from the same numbers from the book, side by side. We've got our static budget, which is our original projection, our operating budget, our actual results, and the yellow areas are some of the places that I noticed there were changes. So we didn't quite do as many, we did more fee-for-service visits than we thought. We had more capitated visits than we thought, so that might be a problem with an indication we might have more variable costs than we thought because we have more visits than we thought would be happening. And I believe, we probably got paid for the same amount of lives. The capitated lives remain the same, so we're not going to get any more revenue out of that because there's no added revenue because we have added visits because it's on capitation. Revenue assumptions, we thought we'd get $25. We ended up getting 24. And again, we had the more visits up here. So we have more revenue. And we got paid what we thought we would for the lives because we had the same number of months as we thought we would have, which can and cannot happen. In this case, in the book, it did happen. It's highly unlikely that it happens exactly. We're going to move into cost assumptions. We had a lot more labor hours, and we had to pay more for those labor rates. Supplies, more supplies. Well, we had more, I think we saw that we had more capitated visits, so that would make sense. And we also, that gives us more variable costs, but the important thing is the variable cost per unit rose by $1. Overhead plant and fixed costs remained the same. Now, realistically, that doesn't happen, but in our case, not to complicate things, we left it the same. But total costs were up. And if you look at the pro forma profit and loss statement, you'll notice that we were projecting net results of positive 130 and ended up at a minus 252. So what does all this mean? Well, we've got different kinds of variances. We're going to start walking through all the variances, and we're going to start with this first one called the profit variance. To understand the profit variance, it's actually rather simple. We're going to go way down here, and we're going to see that our net results were 130 in the static budget. We ended up with a loss of this. So I've got a little note here that says, hey, Frank, remember, you have some hidden columns here to help demonstrate the profit variance. So let's unhide these. I'm just going to unhide this. Right click, unhide, and there we go. So when we decide whether we have a variance, when we have a variance, we always have a variance. I mean, even if it's neutral and there isn't one, there's still a calculation of the variance when we're looking at our budget versus our actual. So here's our profit, right down here, profit or loss variance. And we had projected 130, and we ended up minus 252. When calculating variances, the best way to do it is to always first understand whether you had a favorable or an unfavorable variance. Well, let's see. We thought we were going to have a positive 130. We ended up with a negative 252. I would say we have an unfavorable profit variance. And that is simply the difference between the actual 252 minus the 130 gives us a total variance of 382. Now, the next thing to try to figure out is in broad terms, what caused that variance? Was it because we didn't have enough revenue? Was it because we had too much cost? Or was it a combination of both? Well, it's 99.9999% of the time a combination of both. So let's look at our total, or at our variances. Let's start up here with our revenue variance. We thought we would have 1980. We had 2040. Is that positive? Is that favorable or unfavorable? Well, I think we got more revenue in than we had planned. So that would be favorable. And it would be simply the actual amount less the budgeted amount, the static budget amount, giving a favorable $60,000 variance. Now that's interesting because we saw that big loss on the bottom, so you might think, well, they just didn't have enough revenue. Well, you could see that we actually had more revenue than we projected. Now, and let's just see if we quick look. I would say it is most likely because right here, because of our fee-for-service dollar, we had more visits in our fee-for-service. We had 4,000 more visits in fee-for-service. Okay? And you'll notice we only got $24, so there may be further analysis to talk about on this. But overall, revenue did change and increase by $60,000 over budget. So let's look at our total variable costs. Well, we thought we would have this much cost, but we had this much. That's definitely unfavorable. So we would take our unfavorable. Unfavorable is always going to be in credits a negative. We have to take our static numbers less our actual, and we get the negative 442. Now notice these two numbers here together gives us the 382. All we've done is said, okay, we have this profit variance. Let's break it into two pieces and see what it's made of. Well, positive revenue and a much bigger cost overrun. Oh, one other thing. This could be a component of it, but fixed costs remain the same, so there was no variance. It was a neutral. Let's now go and explore the revenue variance and see if we can drill down a little deeper and see if we can understand how come it varied so much. Well, here we go. Okay. This is our static budget. This is our actual results. This is called a flex budget or flexible results. What did you do on a flexible budget is you determine, you use the actual number of volume you get out of your actual results times your standard cost. Now that's embedded in these numbers, so you can't see it here. Further on in this video and in the homework, we get into that a lot more on looking at the per unit prices and the per unit costs. So simply here, our variance we saw was a favorable variance in revenue. And because we know our static budget was 1980, we ended up at 2040, giving us a favorable variance. Okay? Great. And I put a little A, B, and C up here, and this is just C minus A. Gives us the 60,000. Okay? And that's same as this. Same as this one. I just went back to one sheet. And we're really just drilling down into the revenue variance. Okay, now, here's the interesting thing. We want to know the reason we have the flexible budget. This helps us tell us how much of this budget positive variance came about because we had more volume, and how much of this variance came about because our price that we were able to get for air services was different from our budget. So, right here, we look at this and we say, okay, what's the difference between our flexible budget and our static budget? Okay, we look at it and say, well, the flexible budget says we have 2080. Our static budget was 1980. So we have a favorable result. This is the result under the flexible results. This is our result column now. It's like our actual in the earlier ones. And so we're higher than we thought we would. And that's because our volume was higher. Because remember, all we've done in this column is take our actual volume times our standard price that we were going to get per visit. And so it's a favorable $100,000 variance because we had more visits based on our standard cost. Now look over here. Now we're going to look at this flexible budget as compared to our actual results. And this is where we're going to get our price variance. Because we take this has our actual units, and this has our actual units. This has our actual price This has our standard price. So when we look at these two, we right away see, okay, Flex said this, but our actual result was lower, so it was unfavorable. So we would take column C minus column B, C minus B, to get our unfavorable of 40. Unfavorable. Now notice, these two together have to equal what our overall variance is. All we're doing is breaking our overall revenue variance into two pieces and seeing how much of it was from because of volume and how much of it was because of price. So when we say, what does that mean? That's exactly what that means. It means, one more time, that we had more visits than we thought, but we did not get as much money as we thought per visit. Now, let's move on to cost variance, because it is very, very similar to this. Actually, boom, there's revenue, there's cost. See how similar it is? Now, these costs, the 1850 and the 2292, if you go back to our budgets, and we have our total costs, these numbers added together give us those total costs, which will give us the same variance. Here's the same variance of 442. And again, we thought we would have this much a cost, and you can see I put in both the variable and the capitated. Sorry, the variable, that shouldn't say capitated. I should say fixed. Sorry. Fixed costs remain the same in all of them. Now, when we create the flexible budget, to get this, we took the actual units we used in our variable costs multiplied by what we thought they would cost us. That's what this flexible budget is right here. So our total difference between the two was an unfavorable, because costs are a lot higher than we thought they'd be, 442. But let's see how much of this variance relates to volume and how much it relates to more cost per unit. Here's our volume variance. So we would look at our flexible budget was this, and our static budget was that. We thought we would only have that much cost, but we had more costs. So it's unfavorable, and by $330,000. So 442 total cost variance, of which 330, more like 2/3 of it, relate to volume. And remember, with variable costs, the more volume you have, the more cost you're going to have. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you're getting money for that the added volume, you're all set. But in a capitated environment, you're going to have more visits without any more revenue, but you are going to have more costs if you have more visits. Now let's see how much of it was to price. Well, it looks here like we take the 2180, which we thought we would get in the static budget. We actually got 2292, so again, it's an unfavorable result. And we take the difference between the two, and we get a negative 112. Again, you add these two together, you get your total variance. So what does this mean? It means that we had more visits and more costs, plus we had more visits, which cost us more at standard, but we also had the cost of a visit. What we thought it would cost was higher than what we thought. So they're both unfavorable variances. In the other situation, we had one that was favorable and one that was unfavorable. In this case, both of them are unfavorable. Okay. And it could be, one thing you should realize too, it could not just be that we had more visits that caused us to have more unit costs. It could be that we used more of whatever it is per visit than we thought we would do. We could have the same amount of visits, but we say we thought our supplies would only be $1. Well, we ended up using 5 of those supplies instead of 2 of them because we underestimated that, I don't know, you could say maybe people bled more than you thought. I don't know, something like that. So it's not just because of the visit, it could be the nature of the visit. Okay, now we're going to switch over to show us the full 3 budgets. And what I've done is I've put in the number of visits so you can see right away in the flexible results, we take the actual visits, that's that column, and we'll take you'll see later on, here's the actual visits, and we'll take the standard per revenue cost, not the revenue cost that we actually got. So the only difference in the flexible budget is it's giving us our actual units used or visits made against what our standard cost would be in the static budget. So we can go quickly down through here and just see some of the differences. Again, I kept it all the same. I've even done more than the book has done. I gave all 4 of these groupings for each of the 3 budgets. And we've got our volume, revenue, our cost, and then here again is a profit and loss statement. And you can see we thought we'd do this, and we ended up with these 2. We'll end up with this loss, but a portion of it was because of volume, and a portion of it was because of costs per unit being higher. Okay, we've got one more slide that I'm going to show you. It's going to look like, oh my gosh, it's talking about really drilling down into more variances as we get deeper and deeper. And this is just good for you to know. There might be a few questions that you come across in the textbook that we have to it, but this is really just to really explain it very thoroughly for you. The book does actually, I would say, probably a fairly poor job on doing the next slide. We're going to talk through it, and it's to your advantage to try to understand it. It'll make all the other work a lot easier. Because if you get the concept, again, when you come across this further on in your careers, you'll be able to remember and start to investigate it and recall it a lot easier. So here we go. This is now the cost variance versus management variance. Okay. Here's our costs that we had again. We had our total costs in the static budget, our total costs in the flexible budget, and the total in our actual results. And remember the 442, we talked about how we got that. It was unfavorable because our actual results, our actual costs are a lot higher than we thought they would be here. Now, what we're going to do is start looking into these costs again one more time. We've done this before. We've done this. See here in the cost variance. See the 330 and the 1112. I think if we go back here, there's the 330 and the 1112. So we've already talked about this portion of this variance, which brings us. We look at this, which brings us all this area we have talked about. And we've talked about this being the volume variance on this cost variance, and this being the price variance. Now we're going to take this price variance and we're going to break that down further, because we want to see how much of that price variance was caused because of a labor price variance or a supply cost variance. Because remember, we had 2 different components of our costs. We had the labor costs and we had supply costs. We also had the fixed costs, but remember, this is the one in the middle. We had no variance at all, so I'm calling that neutral. So again, let's look at this 112,000 price variance and start to break it out. Well, let's see if we can go up here. Okay, let's get started again. Sorry, I got sidetracked. What we're going to do, again, is break this variance into more detail. Remember, this variance is over here. It's our price variance, the difference between the flex and the actual, and it was an unfavorable variance. Let's see if we can do this to that, so that, see if freeze frame, just go like, oops, do that. Just see if we can. Okay, so all I did was so that this will stay on top of our spreadsheet as I scroll down. So again, this is this, and this gives us this variance, and this is a price variance. Now let's just see how this variance got broken up into three different pieces. First, let's start with the labor variance. There we go. And you can see the labor variance. Here we thought that we would have 1493. We ended up having 1557, and we must have been charged more per labor cost. And that gave us an unfavorable variance of 64,075. I'll just go like that. See the difference between these two. This is the difference between the overhead cells. I put it in the middle of the fixed cost only because I wanted to be able to have these separate things. It's not that I really skip it. It doesn't matter if there's the same order going down. And now let's look at our supply cost. We thought we would have this. We ended up having this. These are both the same actual units used, so the difference has to be because of cost, and it's unfavorable of 47,925. Now what we're going to do is look further. Why did the labor change? And in order to do that, I'm just showing you this, and we're going to have to flip back to the other budgets to show you where these came from. But there's a rate and an efficiency change of 59 and 4, both of them unfavorable, and both of these unfavorable over here. So let's look again. We'll look at our rate first. So here's our total change. Add those together, we get our 64,075, or our labor variance. Let's see how much of that variance was because of a rate difference, and how much of it was because of how much we used, our efficiency on it. Okay, to do that, we've got to jump over to the other spreadsheet. We're going to go right over here, and let's see here. Here we go, and these are our cost assumptions. So here's our labor that we're talking about right here. I'm trying to understand the differences. So for our rate change, we would take our budgeted, our static budget rate less our actual rate. So you see we have a negative, we have an extra dollar cost per rate times the number of hours we use will give us the difference due to due to rate change. So the dollar times the 48,000. Sorry. Yes. What did I do? Let's try that again. Okay, I'm sorry. I know what I did. I misspoke. I'll go back here. It's the rate change, so it's unfavorable, times our actual rate on labor hours. So it's the 59.9. I said the 48. I apologize. It's the 59.9. And let's see. So it would be $1 negative $1 times 59.9 should give us that. There we go. Now let's look at how much of it was because of efficiency, not because of the labor change, but because of efficiency. Let's go back here, and let's see here. It would be right here. We use this much hours, this many hours in our static budget, and we have this. So the difference of these times our rate, our actual rate, should give us our efficiency variance. Let's see if we're right. Yes, yes. 4,165 negative unfavorable efficiency variance. Now the cost variance, supply cost variance, is done exactly the same. Now, you're not going to be held accountable for this on a test. You just need to know that you can get down, you can even break these efficiency variances up one more time. And it's if you're in charge of something like this, and you would know that they have this capability, you would talk to your finance department, and you'd get them to calculate these out for you so that you can make informed decisions. Now, again, the next video 2, is going to be three problems that are very similar to the problems in the book. These three problems that I'm walking you through will really help you to do that homework. So I would really advise you to watch video 2. And then also during the week, we've got to watch video 3, which is our introductory into our next chapter. Okay, enjoy yourselves and see you soon.